was supposed to look at the repair order, and I didn't. I was too busy jacking around with my camera. So let me I can jump over here in a minute and just and open up Shopware and read the repair order. But um, who's been assigned this job? Nobody? Me? Am I the only one been assigned to the job?
No,
Is that
Alex
you?
was assigned to it.
All right,
Alex,
Alex.
The
have you looked at
what
it
was
yet?
you remember the codes on it?
Not really.
I've got them pulled up in the.
Yeah, let me open up my Shopware.
I've got them pulled. If you're on the ISTA machine, Eric,
I am. Yeah.
there. Okay, there you go. There's those codes are what got pulled up in the AutoLogic. Same ones.
Okay. All right. I'm logging
Those
in
look
right
familiar.
now. Password. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So these are the faults that got logged in, and then so the check engine light is on right now. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Let me open this up here. Okay. We've got our multi-point done. Registration. So registration tags are expired. Diagnose and advise the check engine light / drivability. Is there a drivability? Is there a noticeable drivability?
The customer stated that there is. We haven't actually test driven it to verify.
Okay. All right. There's there may actually be. I mean, it's the mileage. The mileage for the exhaust gas recirculation stuff. What's our current mileage? Let me see here. I don't see your mileage on the repair order. Odometer. Okay, 165, 064. 165, 064. Okay. So 165. So the cam sensor faults, somewhat relevant. The pre-supply control. Reducing agent activation, that's probably, then that's current as well. So that's, but I was just looking at the EGR. If we had an EGR issue, which doesn't look like it's happened recently, that will definitely reduce engine output. They'll notice a reduction in power. But those are not currently what's turning the mill on. So it looks like we've got two different scenarios, right? So if we were going to take a look at this, take a look at the repair order. We've already done the courtesy inspection, it looks like, which is awesome. So you get a general overview of the condition of the vehicle. And for job line 4, we've got two scenarios, both of them being separate. You know, what's turning the light on right now is reducing agent, metering valve activation, and then it looks like that's all that, you know, would be turning on the mill. But we've got reducing valve, metering valve activation faults, you know, more than once, just only one of them is currently present. But that's not going to cause a drivability typically. It'll cause a countdown, right? The no restart in so many miles. If that continues and it determines that no NOx conversion through the selective catalyst reduction system is possible, then it'll go ahead and start the countdown for no restart until, you know, and hopefully alert the customer to get in and service that before they get locked out. Does everybody understand the countdown? But the drivability, I mean, I have a hard time believing that that's part of the drivability. So I suspect that the drivability issue is going to be either on the pre-supply pressure control and the exhaust temperature, exhaust gas temperature sensor plausibility with relationship to the temperature of the EGR cooler. So those will definitely cause a drivability, as well as a camshaft sensor signal. So let's try and determine how often this has happened. So we'll come up
Hey,
with,
Eric, real quick on the countdown.
Yeah.
What exactly causes the countdown?
anything to do with the selective catalyst reduction ability to reduce NOx, to activate the SCR system in a manner that produces a NOx reduction that's measurable. If it's determined that the solution is not adequate for the chemical conversion that occurs, then it'll go ahead and start the countdown then, because it believes that it was incorrectly refilled. Somebody's trying to trick the system by just filling it with water or peeing in there, which is not a good idea.
It's pet urine, anyways, right?
It's a chemical ammonia. I mean it's a lab derived. I don't think it actually has anything to do with the with it's not like a biofuel, if you will.
All right, so it could be low on def, or essentially it means that the cat is not reducing NOx.
Right. If you have a problem with a NOx sensor where it's implausible, problem with the temperature sensor pre SCR catalyst, then it won't turn on dosing. So and this is where the exhaust temperature with a diesel comes in. It's pretty important. Oh shoot. That might be Santa Cruz County Court, but I'll deal with them later. What was I saying? Yeah, exhaust temperatures. So with a diesel, your exhaust temperature is going to be a lot lower than that of a gasoline engine, right? Gasoline engines are not very efficient, right? So thermal energy is lost through the exhaust system. It's, you'll see, temperatures in the 600 to 1,000 degrees C on a gasoline engine, whereas with a diesel, we're kind of pushing it to get up to up to 500. That would be pushing it, right? It's just, and that's usually after there's some additional fuel and we're lighting off we're in a regen situation. That's about the hottest it's going to get. But so what we're looking at, exhaust gas temperature recirculation, the exhaust gas temperature with regard to the EGR, there has to be a certain reduction in temperature, so it runs through the cooler. So it's going to monitor the exhaust gas temperature before the catalyst, because that's where it's going to pick it up for EGR. And so that has to be a very valuable or a valid measurement. That same measurement is used behind the diesel oxidation catalyst. There's another temperature sensor there, and there should be a 10-degree increase when the system is working correctly. That would indicate that the oxidation catalyst is working and functioning. We'll have a 10-degree increase, and that'll be the temperature right before the diesel particulate filter, which is also primary for determining if a late injection strategy, is still required to add a little bit of extra fuel so that fuel enters the exhaust stream and starts cooking off the particulate matter in the diesel particulate filter as part of the regen. That's when we're going to have our hottest temperatures. And then there's a temperature sensor downstream from that, right next to the dosing or the metering module or the dosing module, for SCR, and that's the temperature sensor that's classified as the before SCR catalyst. And that temperature, it's monitoring. It needs to see 150 degrees C minimum before it can start dosing or adding urea to the exhaust stream, and that's due to the chemical reaction that occurs when at 150 degrees C minimum, when the urea is dosed into the exhaust stream and the mixer breaks it up so it's atomized. At that point, the chemical reaction that takes the ammonia and chemically breaks it down into elements that allows an oxygen to be stripped from the the NOx, which is usually NO3 to NO5. So we have free oxygen. We'll combine those with carbon dioxide, which so we'll have CO2 is a byproduct. We'll have hydrogen as hydrocarbons. So we'll strip some carbons out, and we'll make more CO2. We'll add some oxygens to the hydrogen to create water. So the byproduct is additional CO2, water, and nitrogen, which is makes up 70% of the air anyway. So that's the idea, but it's all based on that temperature variant. It's got that does not occur. That chemical reconstruction in the catalyst cannot occur if it's under 150 degrees C. So temperature sensor faults will cause the countdown to happen. NOx sensor faults. This metering valve activation could cause it, because at that point, when it does see a temperature target that's ready for dosing, it doesn't see a reaction from the metering valve, then there's not going to be a conversion at that point. It's in the criteria to start the countdown, probably on a shortened schedule, so they may only get 100 miles rather than when it's getting low, they'll start off at a couple hundred miles for a warning. Does that answer the question? And then, all right, I can't see you, so
they're mostly nodding their heads saying yes.
Okay, cool. Well, I can't see you, so speak up. All right, so but looking at this the faults that we have here, let's just look at filter fault memory to kind of look at a timeline. So where we're at now looks like only fault we had there is the
let's move these tables closer. This guy
so all these happen pretty much right in this range. So there's no reason to filter this, so we'll just go ahead and cancel it, but knowing they all happen about the same time. Interesting. This the EGR recirculation plausibility, that's something that we can take a look at. Cam sensor signal, pre-supply control, those kind of raise red flags for voltage supply to me. So what's turning on the light now? It's going to be this one right now. So let's take a look at, right? So we select the fault. We'll display the fault code.
I don't know why it turned back. It's like it turned back on. So we just moved the table like 6 feet closer. So you should be able to see.
Am I too low? Am my volume too low?
No, your volume's good as long as we don't. If we do any sort of test where we start the engine, we won't be able to hear you.
Okay.
But right now it's good.
Okay. All right. So we're looking at the fault that's currently present, right? So this is a reducing agent metering valve activation. So the fault is entered if it's present for longer than 1 second and up to 2 seconds, right? It can be debounced. Check the line connections. If the wiring is okay, replace the SCR metering module. That's pretty straightforward as far as the test plan would go. Let's look at the details. happened 61 times, and it's currently present. So the logistics counter is at 40. So it is live right now. Last time it happened, it was at 90 degrees C, which is, it's a good clue. We know that it's hitting 90 degrees C, because oftentimes when we get into SCR diagnosis, one of the things that you need to pay attention to is engine coolant temperature, because of, we know that these thermostats fail. When they fail, they don't fail closed, luckily. They fail open, so they stick open. So it never really gets up to temperature. We'll see temperatures below 70 degrees C in the cooling system, and that's a red flag. There's no way you can ever, achieve the SCR system minimum temperature of 150 degrees consistently if the engine coolant temperature is not coming above 70 degrees C. So, trying to keep the exhaust temperature up for all of these other functions is key with the diesel, mainly for the emissions components that are on there. I mean, the diesel engine does not care. But 90 degrees C, I know that, okay, thermostat's working somewhat. That's all I'm trying to point out, is I just keep that in the back pocket. Always think about what's the engine coolant temperature. Rail pressure looks pretty reasonable. 431 at what RPM? Oh, at the 1300. Yeah, that's what I would expect. We were going to see about 310 at idle, so just off idle. We're about to transition into the flaps switching over right about that speed. The charging pressure is at 1200. So that's, for this last event. So we have not full boost yet, but we're in boost. So that's good. And ambient pressure looks plausible. Battery voltage 13.7, so we know we're charging. All right, but it just happened. And if we were going to reproduce this scenario, we'd look at that engine RPM, right, and charge pressure, and rail pressure is really all you've got, because you don't really have a calculated load that you could duplicate, or throttle position, because the throttle position on this diesel is where? Anybody, holler.
Non-existent.
No, it exists. There is a throttle. It uses the throttle, really only uses the throttle when you turn off the engine. So it closes down the air intake. Okay. That's about the only time it's used. Besides that, it's open, wide open, right? And that's it's kind of a mind bender if you're a gas guy. Like, well, how the hell can this thing be idling at wide open throttle? And that's where EGR comes in. So we'll look at that as we get through this. So we have a freeze frame here. Let's go ahead and just print this for a second. Print the document. You guys don't have a PDF? There we go. All right. I'm just gonna it looks pretty good for one finger. All right. All right, so we're there. We've saved our freeze frame. So now we can reproduce that if we don't want to. Let's see what BMW has in store for us. What test plan they think we should follow. All right. The SAE faults are always going to be at the top. It's basically going to run you through, like, hey, if there's a test that's coming up, they need to run a smog test. then you're going to have to, after you resolve the problem, you're going to have to either reproduce the situation so that it shows that the enable criteria or the fault criteria have been satisfied and the fault is no longer present, and then let the car go to sleep, or let the car go to sleep after the repairs, then wake it back up, clear the faults, and then run the conditions again so that it verifies and runs the monitor. Otherwise, you'll have a prolonged resetting the monitor process. It'll instead of just one trip, it may take 2 to 3 to verify, because it's still operating under the, hey, 3 times consecutively before we're going to let this go. The SAE fault will hang in the background, indicating that there was a fault with the system, and there hasn't been a successful monitoring test performed inside of that 3 test parameter. So it weights it to getting a fail if it goes to an emissions test, if it's a state that requires the monitor be running complete. So, reading through we're not going to look at it now, but reading through the SAE fault test plan, getting familiar with that to speed up that process. There's a couple of tips in there for you. Otherwise, just clearing the fault, you set yourself up for a lot more road tests than you need to. The sleep cycle is kind of the important part of that. All right, but SCR, we can see which faults we've got. We've got our reducing agent, so it wants to put that right up here at the top underneath the SAE fault, which always goes on top. So the metering module, I guess, Alex, did you say you've already tested this and that you activated it and it did not click? Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So did you monitor did you back probe it at all to see if there was any kind of voltage?
No, I was just looking at the codes and then decided to do a quick activation test and then moved on to something else.
Right, because that's not what you didn't get authorization to do that yet. It's perfect answer.
Yeah, that's why.
That's right. But they know now that I'm stealing your hours of diagnostic that are coming to you, taking them away right now.
I'll take the credit, so it's all good.
Cool, good. So if I totally mess this up, it's on you. All right. So we're looking at the fault details again. We can move past that. I think. All right. So check lines, plugs, and connections. You activated it already. Check the component, the metering module, and then the dosing amount measurement. Things to be cautious of. Activating the metering module in the exhaust stream multiple times during testing. Just try and avoid that. If the vehicle's not even close to being at operating temperature, you want to, if you're going to do an activation, remove it from the exhaust stream. And it gives you 2 things to look at. Anytime you remove the functional description should be here. Anytime you remove this metering module, they may have a picture on the functional description, which would show. No, it's not showing jack. All right. It's mounted to a flange, and it's just got a screw clamp holding it in place on that flange. When you remove it from the flange, you get an opportunity to look into the bore that into the exhaust stream, and you can look for any kind of buildup inside. Anytime you find DEF crystallized buildup, that indicates there's a leak of air around the system, whether it be on a line from the transfer pump over to the from the passive tank over to the active tank. You can have buildup in the transfer pump because the diaphragm will fail, and that introduces air. Anytime air gets into the system, it promotes the DEF crystallization to form. So the same thing happens on the exhaust system. There's typically not any air exposed, exposing that DE or the DEF in that area, right? Because you've got that exhaust flange, and it only turns on at 150 degrees C. So we're free of all air. But if there's a leak around that flange gasket, air can come in through there, right? And then you'll have a crystal, structure built up there. So anytime you see that, build up, look at that gasket as a culprit. You can also look at the end of the metering valve, make sure that there's no crystalline buildup around that, and then you activate it outside of the exhaust system. You can look at the spray pattern, which should be 3 very pronounced beams, if you will, or jets, and then when you do the dosing amount measurement, it's going to actually have you capture the solution, and it's going to have a target of approximately 30 grams, 28 to 30 grams of solution, which is approximately an ounce to you and me. So, and it's very accurate measurement. So it can dose just the right amount. So you can verify that it's, plausible. And that's about the extent of the diagnostic hands-on that you're going to do with the system. Everything else is automatic or automated, which is great. So, for you, Alex, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look. So the SCR metering module gets voltage and control from the DDE directly at 20,009, pins 18 and 20. So, if you're down there and you don't see any power and the complete circuit through this, then something's going on up here at the DDE. Interesting. I'm gonna have Alex jump up here in just a minute. We're not gonna start the car, but this guy had these EGR faults earlier as well, some kind of EGR fault apparently. The repairer indicates that he had replaced all of the EGR hoses at a facility up north, apparently. So we may have seen this, but it's pretty common that when the EGR hoses, the flex hose breaks, usually on the right side, the passenger side, just there for the turbo outlet or inlet. There'll be some hot exhaust, just melting, all kinds of stuff, coolant hoses, intake air tubes, just lots of cool stuff gets melted. So that's something we want to take a look at. Knowing that he had replaced all these hoses earlier, there's probably some other stuff going on in that area. And we may actually just be looking at a damaged wiring harness, because the chances of the metering module, these are pretty. I've not replaced a metering module for a solenoid failure, right? Yet. Not to say it's not going to happen, but this is still pretty early in its service life. But what I have seen is, the DDE take on some DEF from the delivery module, which is the pump that sits on top of the active tank. It runs up to 5 bar, and sometimes it fails and it'll pressurize the harness up to the DDE and fill it up with some DEF, which then is DEF exposed to air, gets kind of exciting up in there. So I might want to take a look at connectors 2009, just make sure that there's no evidence of DEF up there. That's going to be this guy right here on the end. But what I was also going to ask is, we have no connection, to the or no activation. This harness is going to run. It runs. This is going to run to the knock sensors that run across the bell housing, so they go across the back of the cylinder head and down. And if they're left hanging, they can hit the front drive shaft. I think also the metering module. Actually, the metering goes down the passenger side, so this harness will actually run past the pressure differential sensor for the DPF. But if you wanted to take a look down there right now with a flashlight at the back of the cylinder head, you'll see the main engine harness coming from behind the cylinder head across the gap next to some EGR, next to the differential pressure sensor.
Maybe you got to take that the plastic cover off.
You shouldn't have to be able to take. Oh, you mean the plastic engine cover?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we get it's pretty tight up against the cowl.
Yeah.
Let's see.
But you're gonna look for that harness has a shield on it, like a heat shield, but there's about an inch and a half of gap where it's not protected, and that's where it can get exposed. So if you take a look down there, that you may see some damaged wiring harness, and I just try and get that out of the way first. Just take a look. Yeah, if it doesn't look.
And we're looking right at the bell housing area again, right
from the back of the cylinder head. You'll see the main engine wiring harness come across from the back of the cylinder head. You see it there?
Yeah, we can see the top of the loom, and then where it goes into the passenger or the driver's side.
It's going to come over to the passenger side, going into the E-box.
Okay.
So that section, it's got a heat protective sleeve on it, on part of it, and then there's the exposed area that is the area that can take damage. It's right near the
find the exposed area.
Differential pressure sensor.
Where is the exposed area?
Should be right there next to the differential pressure sensor. It's got two rubber hoses coming up to a sensor element.
Yeah, I see like a rubber, like a
fuel hose looking thing. That it passes right past the exposed area of the harness.
It's like, I don't know, it's pretty darn sealed up. I don't see any like bare wires. It's very sealed.
Well, so it'll have that. It has the heat sleeve on it, right?
Yeah. Now, which component are we looking at? Are we looking at the wiring harness or an actual?
Yeah, we're looking at the harness itself.
The harness
just to
itself.
See if you can see anything.
Oh shit!
What?
Fuck! The fucking mouse jumped right out of the car, out of the fucking cowl.
That could be part of the problem.
Fucking ran right across, dude. Oh my god!
I think you're getting close to this, close to the root cause of the problem.
Yeah, there's a problem. And then he ran down the gutter on the other. He ran to the driver's side, and then went right down the rain gutter.
In the vehicle?
Oh, fuck, dude.
Is it in the vehicle still, or
the what?
Oh, did the mouse left the vehicle?
No, it went into.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. So when he leaves, he can leave with the car.
Yeah.
You don't want to take that guy on because he's got a taste for wiring harness, so you don't want him hanging around.
Dude, I bet there's a little nest right there with more chilling right there. I bet.
Okay.
Yeah, so the nesting. Well, I think what we need to do is maybe access the e-box.
Mm,
I don't see any
yeah, you're
more.
going to end up needing to access it eventually, because you're going to want to look at the connector and make sure that you don't have any urea in the DDE. But again, so this test will continue with, activation outside of the exhaust stream, verifying that you've got a complete circuit through the solenoid, which I doubt you do. And once that's repaired, then you'll continue and you'll run the dosing amount, verify that either through weight or measure, and inspect for any restriction buildup in the exhaust stream. And from that point, while you're running the test, you can go over and look at the delivery module, which should be building 5 bar of pressure. So that's usually the scan tool will tell you while it's activating that it's built up to 5 bar of pressure. And if that's the case, then everything is copacetic on that end of it, and you just reassemble. Put the delivery module, or the metering module, back in place, and then you would continue with the SCR system test, which is an automated test, self-test, which is by far one of the greatest test modules that BMW's ever created. Is the SCR system test. Maybe only second to the energy diagnosis, for all time greatest tests ever. That's my opinion. I'm a big fan of both of those. So that would be how we would approach this. Would be the
okay, so maybe summarize this all again. So we didn't talk about the cam sensor code at all, do we? Maybe
nope,
we don't need
we can get to that. Let me see. We can't get to that. We can maybe get to that. We got 3 minutes.
But yeah. So I guess like next steps when we make when we finish our diagnostic report and we send it to the customer, the next steps are we're going to check that we're going to remove the dosing valve and then inspect its verify how much it's dosing. If I heard that correctly.
So here it's going to check the component, right? So, and we're doing exactly what I told you shouldn't be doing. It's activating in the exhaust stream, which you're listening for noise, and you didn't hear a noise, right?
Did you? No, they all heard a noise.
They did.
Yeah.
It's ticking right now?
No. It's not ticking right now. But would you guys hear? A ticking or a tick tick? How many ticks? 3 ticks is what they heard.
Okay. So that lends itself more to a wiring issue, which we're highly suspect of anyway. And then you follow so you didn't hear it activate, check the circuit. Once that's corrected, look at the dosing amount, and then end the test module. So that's what you would do here. Again, I highly suspect that there's something going on with the harness. It's very rare that you see the metering module actually fail. You see DDE failures due to contamination or wiring harness issues more than anything else. So, but follow this, and then once that's done, you can verify that the SCR system is then fault free. Because now, here's the downside of this is that anytime you touch any of the components in the SCR system, it's almost obligatory that you have to give a complete analysis or end result Otherwise, any SCR fault that returns is instantly categorized as a repeat visit. Unfortunately, that's the case. And by the time you're done explaining to the customer, the nuanced situation where you've got 3 to 4 different components and component groups in the system that are dependent on certain enable criteria like exhaust temperature to work, you're wasting your breath. They don't care. You sound really smart for a minute, but you're still the dumbass that's going to end up paying for this repair. So anytime you do a repair on an SCR component, I recommend running the SCR system test at the very end, so that you see, if there's something lingering, if there's an additional issue that's going to creep up later, it up front, and you can turn that in for additional diagnostic and repair. So keep in mind with diesels, always give yourself, there should always be an extra hour at the end of the job for that SCR system test, because it takes an hour and it runs itself, but the results are comprehensive. There's if you look at the final report, my dog is tearing up the office right now because it's thundering and he's scared. Hi, guy. He's just mowing stuff down. So it gives you all of the temperature sensors, the range, the time frames that it took for activation to occur. It'll purge all NOx. Then it'll go ahead and load up and store NOx, and then it converts it. You can look at the differential between the how much NOx is being reduced from the front sensor to the rear sensor, and the catalyst efficiency percentages. And from that you really start to get a familiarity with the system and what nominal values you should expect to see on a normal working system. The minimum SCR catalyst efficiency to be considered fault free is 70%. It's got to be able to reduce 70% of the NOx. You get to see the adaptation process occur, which is interesting in itself. There is a long-term adaptation for the SCR dosing amount. And we could go into a whole, the SCR system is fascinating, and how it works. We could go into the whole, how it sets an adaptation, what the urea looks like, the whole ammonia slip phenomenon, as part of as a bookend to one of the adaptation values. It's pretty interesting stuff. But you've got something simple going on here. This is straightforward, and this, like I said, a lot of people will get buried in the weeds on the SCR diagnosis, trying to do a whole bunch of crazy rigmarole. And really, all you need to do is this, and once this part passes, everything else is using the scan tool and scan data. All right, so let's get out of here real quick. And I'm 4 minutes over, but let's just take a look at this cam sensor.
And just real quick, which test is that again? That's the test for
this is the SCR metering.
Got it.
Yeah. And since we didn't find anything yet, I'm gonna put no fault found, to be honest with you. All right, there's my diag code indicating I did a whole bunch of nothing. Okay, so if the metering module is renewed, reset the adaptation for the NOx sensor. That's that long-term adaptation, which I'll show you if you wanted to look at that real quick. Okay, we're back here. Let's go to vehicle information. Let's call up BDE information here. Call up control unit. SCR, and we should see long-term adaptation factor. Boink. So 1.13. So it is adding 13%. So you think of the SCR long-term adaptation as using a lambda value. You know, lambda not as in fuel trim, but essentially lambda is 1, and that's the ideal ratio of solution. So just based on that parameter, you'd like to see 1, and when you reset it, 1 is going to be the result. It sets it at 1. This 1.13, that's indicating it's adding 13% more urea, so it's coming up to the limit. It'll fault around 20%, 25%. At that point, you know, it's got a what does it say? It's urea incorrect media installed. So basically, somebody filled it with water, right? Because it's not seeing a conversion, and it runs it all the way up to 25%, 20 to 25%, depending. And if there's some conversion happening, you'll see it run up to 25%. But if there's no conversion happening, it'll fault much sooner than that. So that's indicating that, you know, there definitely could be a delivery module issue or a metering module issue. We're not building up the 5 bar, or if the metering module is not activating, then, you know, we're obviously adding additional urea to compensate. Where it goes negative, you start to see it down to, you know, 90, you know, 0.9 is going to be the fault threshold going the other direction. And usually that's where it starts pulling back urea if there's poor atomization. Anytime you get that crystallization thing happening in front of the metering module, and it doesn't disperse in an atomized fashion, it kind of just dribbles into the exhaust stream. Well, that will prevent the solution from effectively performing the chemical reaction that it should, and it will move through the SCR catalyst and be picked up by the rear NOx sensor, and the urea solution to the NOx sensor looks just like NOx. So if there's too much urea going through, this is the ammonia slip point. There's too much urea going through the SCR catalyst without the conversion happening. It comes through the other side, and you have an increase in NOx. So at that point, the DDE will start backing down the dosed amount to see if there's a change in the conversion factor. But it'll take all the way down to 0.9 before it sets a fault. And so, but anytime you see a number less than 1, you want to think about bad NOx sensors are a very high possibility, or something's affecting the urea atomization, the delivery at the metering, whether it be low pressure in the delivery module, or the metering module is obstructed, or it's just peeing urea in there and flooding the entire exhaust system, and it's if it's leaking, the metering module is actually leaking. And then that I've seen a couple of times. So anytime I run that SCR system test, or the SCR metering module test, it has the activation, where you're listening for it to click. It builds up the pressure to 5 bar. When it does that, I'll run that normally one time, and then I'll run it again. I'll unplug it just so I see that the pressure builds up behind the metering module, and I'll see if it's leaking. Because if it's leaking, that will also cause a negative adaptation. So,
Okay,
all right.
so we've got a pretty good idea on the general direction of repair. Alex, can you write up a like a full on diagnostic next step for this car
What we've
for the
got
reducing
here
agent?
though is,
Okay.
and one thing I would look at, so there's the system adjustment, which you wouldn't, that's been added into the test plan since we ran the SCR metering module. If it's renewed or corrected, it's going to want you to reset that adaptation. We still have the temperature sensor faults here. Again, I explained how important temperature sensor values are with the exhaust stream. So many things are dependent on that. So I would run the EGR cooler bypass flap test, and that's also going to include a vacuum activation test because it's running an EPDW. Basically, it activates vacuum to the bypass valve or not. So you'll be looking at the vacuum supply to that valve, and it sits right on top of the front of the engine there. You can probably see it. It's the vacuum hose that's right at the front top of the engine.
The customer thinks that he just needs to do EGR repair because that's what the other shop has told him.
Well,
so obviously this thing needs it's got like some SCR stuff, it's got some EGR stuff, it's got a camshaft sensor that we still have to deal with.
Yeah,
definitely some mouse shit, some temperature sensor stuff. It's weird, the mouse is kind of, there's hardly a horrible mess in this car that you usually see mice just leave giant nests everywhere. There's hardly that at all. I mean, it's just like minor, little tiny stuff. Nothing.
Is it underneath the intake manifold, maybe?
Yeah. The intake manifold, like underneath, there's that rubber mat underneath that, and then the intake is just clean. It's spotless underneath there.
If you go over to the driver's side and look at the oil filter housing, and then straight across from there, the back of the oil filter housing, straight across, there's kind of there's a vacuum junction. There's the tangential or the swirl flap activation area. There's the glow plug control module sits up under there. So it's kind of a nice little platform for critters.
Yeah. I mean, it's just clean. There's definitely where the mouse jumped up from. There's some nesting in that e-box area, but and there's some nesting on the way underneath the master cylinder, like way down there. That's
nesting. Another. Yeah. So they're choosing the little private rooms rather than the main area. All right. Well, they may be lucky.
All right. Well, cool. Well, maybe so we need to. What we'll do is maybe Alex can call you on this one and get just a better idea of like the other things like EGR, temp sensor, cam sensor. Maybe they're all related to a mouse. Well, we need to do a real thorough inspection before we even do anything else.
Well, for quick and dirty, you could always go back to vehicle, vehicle information, and then just look because we are in a key on engine off status right now. So that's the perfect time to look at your intake manifold pressure or your charge pressure sensor versus ambient. It's a perfect time to look at your coolant temperature sensor versus your exhaust temperature sensors. You're going to see the exhaust temperature sensor and the exhaust back pressure sensor before the or after the turbo, before the catalyst. They're going to be skewed. They're usually about 10 to 15 millibar above spec And temperature wise, they're about usually about 10 degrees higher than everything else. And that's a calculated correction factor, I would imagine, but that's pretty common. And it's so I would not get too excited about that. It's when it goes out where there's a 20-degree difference that things get a little, crazy and implausible. So we're gonna just look at diagnostic requests, and you can look at motor operating values. I think we can see some in particulate system. Regen, nope. Well, differential pressure, undo all. I think it's going to be under motor operating values. We should be able to see temperature sensors. So engine temperature, intake air temperature, coolant temperature. There'll be where we're going to see our exhaust. That's going to be over in charge air exhaust temperature sensor before the catalytic converter, which is that's a primary sensor for that EGR bypass. So that's going to look at that exhaust temperature, and then it's going to look at the temperature value after the bypass. And when the bypass is opened or closed, there should be a temperature difference. So that's what it's looking for. But right now, key on, engine off, we should be able to see. So it's 28 degrees. Go back over here, look compared to get all this stuff real quick. Engine temperature, big air temperature. So 28 degrees. So yeah, I mean, I would say that's pretty plausible. Intake air temperature when it's running, so it's a little off. But so that looks pretty reasonable. That exhaust temperature before the catalyst, which is the one that it's using for EGR. Then come back over here. We should be able to see temperature sensors here. Looks pretty plausible to me. So that fault is not currently present, and it doesn't look like it's an issue at the moment. It may be an issue at temperature, because that value, as it gets hotter, you may have the sensor actually start to fail there, where there's the resistance either increases or decreases, changing the value to an implausible value, but only when it's hot. That's a possibility. You can use expert mode in diesel, which is and then I'll get out of here because you guys got to get work. If you go over to vehicle management and go to function structure, you call up powertrain, and we get expert mode here. We should get it. I think it's up here. Dang it. Okay, so where is it? Dog's freaking out. Oh, you know what? Might be they shove it over in service functions, even though it's not a service function. They've been moving this around. Adjustment. No. All right. So there is an expert mode in here. The release notes always tell you where they moved it to. Function structure. I should be able to maybe text search. Which expert mode is great because it actually it lets you run the tests, and it graphs all the results over time. So you get a really good, easy visual of the relationships. And if you've got a sensor that's skewed, you'll see it. it'll trend out of bounds and may come back in. Whereas if you're looking at just numbers moving around, it's really hard to capture that trend while looking at the values of other sensors at the same time. So that's the one benefit that expert mode is going to give you as a technician, is to allow it to run that test and then give you a visual, graphic representation at the end that makes it very easy to pick, a sensor or an actuator that's out of spec. And we'll see what
okay, so it sounds like we're just scratching the surface with this vehicle on all the things that we really need to inspect.
But to your point, the customer believes he needs something to do with the EGR, and the reality is that's not why he needs. It's not to say that he doesn't need it later, but what's driving the issue right now is that SCR fault. That's what's turning on the mill. The drivability, that's a separate issue. So, and I think it should be parsed out as a separate issue as well. I would definitely get a couple hours for this SCR repair, because you still have to run the tests and verify the defect, which you have 2 or 3 different options as a defect. Correct the defect, and then run that SCR system test to make sure that the system is still completely fault free, so that you're out of it clean, or present an additional recommendation. So a couple hours on the SCR. As far as the drivability goes, the SCR diagnosis may bring you to a harness issue, which would make sense for the other faults that you have going on there. That's why I'm suspect. Is it either damage back at the back of the harness in the back, where I was having you look before the mouse jumped out, or in the front, right where the EGR system is near the booster in the front? You'll see the wire harness come across the charge tube for the turbo, and has a heat sleeve from that point on going down. There's also some vacuum hoses there. That area will get charred when the EGR tube breaks in the front. So these very well may be related to the EGR failure he had earlier. So, and that may be uncovered as you do the SCR system diagnostic. But that's where I would start. Go with the SCR right now. Get an additional couple hours, and let everything else kind of be in the periphery, that you may uncover something that resolves those issues as well. Otherwise, additional diagnostic will be required for those conditions, the symptoms. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah.
And man, if you guys want to talk about diesels, give me a call. I love diesels. I love talking about them.
All right.
They're pretty cool.
All right. Well, thank you, Eric.
Hey, thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate it. And Alex, feel free to call me. Talk to you guys later.
Thank you.
Have a good week.
You too.